we're going to go ahead and get started then. So good morning, everyone. Bonjour. My name is Diana Ebadi, and I am from the Office of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Thank you for joining us today for this very important announcement. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui à l'occasion de l'annonce d'un financement pour cette importante initiative. Today we have with us the Honourable David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, as well as Moya Teklu, Executive Director and General Counsel of the BLAC Legal Action Centre. And joining us virtually on the line, we have the Honourable Gary Anandasangri, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. We'll have the opportunity to hear short opening remarks from each of our guests, then we will go to Q&A. As usual, we will go with a one question and one follow-up. Le format est d'une question avec un suivi. S'il vous plaît, posez vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Feel free to ask your question in either official language. Before we get started, I want to cover off a few housekeeping details. As always, please turn off your camera and keep your mic on mute when not speaking. Please raise your hand virtually to pose a question during the Q&A session. Select the little hand that appears in your meeting functions to do so. If your meeting functions are not showing, please click on the three little dots that appear on the top right hand of your screen. And for those dialing in, you can press *6 to mute and unmute. I will now turn it over to Parliamentary Secretary Gary Anandasangri, who will say a few words. Parliamentary Secretary Anandasangri, the floor is yours.
Mute, Gary.
Sorry. The ordination, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas and Credit First Nations. I wish I was there in person, but unfortunately, due to personal circumstances, I'm unable to join you today. But I am exceptionally pleased to welcome the Honourable David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, as well as Moya Teklu, Executive Director and General Counsel of the BLAC Legal Action Centre, as well as many colleagues from the legal community, many that we work with on a regular basis. I want to welcome everyone here today. If you're not familiar with their work, the BLAC Legal Action Centre was established in 2017 as an independent, not-for-profit community legal clinic that fights anti-Black racism in Ontario at both individual and systemic levels. Systemic racism and discrimination is a lived reality for far too many people in this country. It can weigh particularly heavy on Black individuals who interact with our justice system, from criminal law to child protection, immigration law, and employment law. Au Canada et partout dans le monde, la population réclame un changement. Nous entendons l'appel à l'élimination de l'injustice, de l'inégalité et de la discrimination systémique. People need to trust that their rights are protected, that their justice systems are responsive, accessible, and fair. This is why our government is working to reform the justice system, to improve fairness in our criminal justice system, and to ensure that everyone has access to the legal information they need, to create a just justice system that is truly just for all. Now, it is my great pleasure to hand the mic to Minister Lametti, who will announce our next steps to continue building the kind of justice system we want to see in Canada. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
This is a rather intimate setting, but a welcome one. Hello, bonjour, kwe. Thank you, Gary, for that introduction. Friends, I'm really lucky. We're all really lucky to have someone like Gary Anandasangri serving alongside other parliamentarians, and in particular in his role as parliamentary secretary. He's been fantastic, and I think everyone around here, I see some nodding heads, everyone around here would know the role that Gary has played in this announcement, and I really can't underscore how valuable he is as a human being, and for all of the right reasons. So thank you, Gary. Merci, Kyle. It's fantastic to work with you. Pleased to be here today in Toronto, as Gary mentioned, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It's also great to be in these offices, and it's nice to see the setting in which you all work. You can't see this if you're watching, if following somewhere online, but there are a number of inspirational, I'll call them posters, around the office from a number of different writers, philosophers, from the Black community in particular. And the one that I was looking at in the preparation room was Bell Hooks, who passed away recently. And her quote in that is about power. But what the quote doesn't say, and what Bell Hooks is famous for, I think, if I had to summarize Bell Hooks in one word, it's love. Love is the source of power. And we forget that, and we shouldn't forget that. She exhorted us not to forget that. And so that was a wonderful little point of inspiration this morning as I looked at that. We're not just here because of justice. We're here because we love each other, and we forget that basic human sentiment is the root of everything that we do. And so let's make it better. So today we're here talking about the steps our government's taking to provide more fair and more equal access to justice for Black communities. This is part of our commitment to address systemic racism and discrimination in all its forms and throughout all the phases of Canada's criminal justice system. I don't need to tell anyone here that racism and discrimination are a painful day-to-day reality for Black and racialized communities across Canada. Sometimes the racism is overt, and it receives international media attention, such as during the Black Lives Matter movements. But racism and discrimination can also happen on a daily basis through microaggressions, through subtle and quiet interactions hidden in unconscious biases or hidden by invisible barriers. That's the day-to-day reality, and we need to address that too. Race plays a significant role in the advantages or disadvantages Canadians and newcomers face in education, employment, and everywhere else in the system. Systemic racism and other forms of discrimination are also present in our criminal justice system. Par exemple, nous savons que les peines minimums obligatoires affectent de manière disproportionnée les Autochtones, les Canadiens noirs ou marginalisés, et en plus de contribuer aux taux élevés d'emprisonnement. C'est pourquoi nous avons présenté le projet de loi C5 avec des opinions de beaucoup de monde qui m'entoure actuellement, afin de réformer le système de détermination de la peine. Le projet de loi C5 abroge certaines peines minimums obligatoires et facilite l'accès aux peines d'emprisonnement avec sursis. We're making concrete changes to right these wrongs and to work towards a criminal justice system that's more fair, more inclusive, more accessible, and more equitable for everyone. My department has been working closely with the Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat and other federal partners on the development of Canada's Black Justice Strategy. That's work that's going to ramp up and continue, in order to address the overrepresentation of Black individuals in the criminal justice system. This will include consultations with experts, stakeholders from Black communities across Canada, as we ensure that we can try to address the gaps in current policies and programs. One important component is to make sure that legal professionals can access the information they need to raise the best legal arguments about anti-Black racism within the justice system. So that brings me to today's announcement. We're getting there. I know this is it's hard to stand for this period of time. I have to do it all the time for the Prime Minister, and it drives me nuts. So I appreciate what you're doing here today. I'm pleased to announce that the Government of Canada is providing $1 million over 4 years to the Black Legal Action Centre for their project Combating Anti-Black Racism Through Litigation and System Navigation. I think that's worth a round of applause. This project will provide information and resources to help legal professionals raise effective legal arguments about individual and systemic anti-Black racism. It will include working with legal associations, law societies, and the Community Legal Education Ontario to disseminate a wide variety of materials, from research and expert reports to templates and training modules to better inform legal professionals and the public. This project grew out of a 2018 needs assessment on key legal issues affecting low-income members of Ontario's Black community, as well as Legal Aid Ontario's racialized community strategy. This program is being funded through the Justice Partnership and Innovation Program, which we lovingly call JPIP, and that aims to improve access to the justice system and build greater awareness of justice issues, including racism. I'd like to thank the Black Legal Action Centre for its ongoing work and its leadership in combating anti-Black racism and discrimination in Ontario. Your efforts are directly in line with many of our priorities as the Government of Canada. For example, in Budget 2021, we announced $21.5 million of funding over 5 years to support the provision of culturally appropriate legal information and resources to pilot legal advice services for racialized communities across Canada. This funding will support organizations that provide free legal public education and information, as well as to organizations that provide legal services and advice to racialized communities. And in Budget 2022, we proposed $85 million over 4 years, starting this year, to support the Canadian Heritage in its work to develop a new anti-racism strategy and a national action plan on combating hate. These funds will help support community projects to better support Black and racialized communities and to raise awareness about issues related to racism and hate in Canada. Nous avons aussi annoncé des investissements afin de faire revivre la Commission des droits du Canada. La Commission a historiquement joué un rôle important pour surmonter les obstacles et remédier à la discrimination dans notre système de justice, notamment pour les Canadiens noirs ou racisés. Notre système de justice doit protéger également chacun d'entre nous. Nous devons saisir toutes les occasions d'agir afin de faire des changements durables. By improving access to justice and addressing anti-Black racism, systemic and individual, we are taking one more step towards true justice for all. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you, Minister Lametti and Parliamentary Secretary Gary Anandasangri. I'm now going to turn it over to Ms. Moya Teklu, Executive Director and General Counsel of the BLAC Legal Action Centre. Over to you.
Thank you very much. The BLAC Legal Action Centre recognizes that our work takes place on traditional territories across the territory now called Ontario. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover this province. BLAC's head office is located on the land known as Toronto. Toronto is the unceded and ancestral territories of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Wendat, and many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands to peaceably share and care for the lands around the Great Lakes. BLAC acknowledges the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the transatlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. We believe that advancing Indigenous sovereignty is deeply and inextricably linked to Black liberation, and we will continue to mobilize and take action in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and communities. Thank you, Honourable Minister Lametti, for your kind words. Black communities across Canada are in a state of crisis. Due in part to discrimination in employment, Black people experience lower employment rates, higher unemployment rates, more insecure, precarious employment, and lower wages and earnings. Black people are overrepresented among people with low income. Police are more likely to stop, search, charge, arrest, use force against, seriously injure, and kill Black people. Yet very few police complaints and human rights applications result in findings of wrongdoings or remedies for victims of police violence. Members of the bench are more likely to hold legally innocent Black people in pretrial detention for longer periods of time. Black people make up 3.5% of the Canadian population, but 9.5% of the federal prison population. While in prison, Correctional Services Canada is more likely to place Black people in maximum security prisons, to lay disciplinary charges for discretionary charges against Black prisoners, as opposed to offenses that require factual proof, to label Black prisoners as having gang affiliations, to release Black inmates later in their sentences, to place Black prisoners in segregation. Despite experiencing similar rates of neglect and of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse as white children, child welfare agencies are more likely to investigate Black families, substantiate allegations of abuse, and transfer Black children out of home care for longer periods of time. In immigration, Canada locks up Black immigrants and asylum seekers longer than other immigration detainees. Canada is also more likely to deport Black people who have been caught up in the child welfare to prison pipeline. Black migrant workers in Canada's seasonal agricultural program are denied the opportunity to ever gain resident status in Canada despite spending most of their working lives in this country. They are bound to particular employers and exclusively tied to work permits and are often find themselves working under exploitative conditions. These present-day realities are examples of anti-Black racism in the justice system that can be traced directly back to our unique history and experience of enslavement and colonization. All this to say, we have a lot of work to do. The Black Legal Action Center is home to some of the brightest minds in the legal community. We also have the support and trust of our clients, of our community partners, of our funders, and our colleagues in the legal profession. This is evidenced by the fact that we are joined today by representatives of the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers, of Legal Aid Ontario, the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, the Refugee Law Association, and the Muslim Legal Support Center, and others. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are joined today by the chair of the Black Legal Action Center Board of Directors, Mr. Roy Williams. With the funding from the Government of Canada, the Black Legal Action Center will use our knowledge, our skills, our experience, and our links to community to empower legal service providers to raise client-centered, race-based arguments in criminal, civil, child protection, prison, and immigration law. We will work to ensure that equality rights of Black people across Ontario and Canada are protected, that Black people have the right to equal protection and benefit of the law as guaranteed by Section 15 of the Charter. There are, of course, limits to what we can achieve through litigation and system navigation. Systemic racism can only be addressed through systemic change. And so we will continue through our other work to advocate for law reform, for changes to mandatory minimum sentences, for automatic criminal record suspensions, for pathways to citizenship for child welfare survivors and migrant workers, for a Black Canadian justice strategy that addresses in a wholesale way the continued criminalization and marginalization of Black people. We thank you for your support in this work, and we will not let the Black community down. Thank you.